A brief word about Sigmund Freud, who is in hell to the praise of God's glorious justice. A wicked man, a terrible man, and a man along with Darwin and others who sought to disprove God. These individuals, Karl Marx would be another, they recognized that the greatest strength and fabric of society was Christianity. And that had to be taken out if they were going to be able to control society. Sigmund Freud, one of his arguments for atheism, one of his arguments against Christianity, and against any religion for that matter, was this. He said that believing in a deity, a God, was just a result of primitive people that couldn't understand, but not just that they couldn't understand. It's not just in regards to their knowledge, but primitive people who were powerless. And so what do? If there's a threat, right? Pestilence, a disease, a plague, or a storm, and you're powerless, and you don't have the technology that we have today, right? You're living in the kind of house that can just be blown over, right? These kinds of natural disasters, when they occur, you don't have modern medicine. You don't have, all this different technology that would work as a bulwark to protect you from the disaster. And whenever a disaster does take place, your life is threatened. You've seen disasters in the past, and many people that you love have been casualties. Well, what do you do in a time period like that where you have few defenses against nature, natural disasters? Well, if the threat that you're experiencing is a person can be appeased. Not always. The person could be cruel. They could be someone who refuses to engage in dialogue and diplomatic, attempts. But an army has a general. You can speak to him. There can be conditions for surrender. Right? Even an individual person, who's trying to mug you in a back alley, God forbid, you can still say, please don't hurt me. I'll give you whatever you want. You can appeal to some kind of, as wicked as they might be, some kind of human nature underneath. You can reach for some level of compassion. But how do you plead with a storm? How do you plead with the bubonic plague? Well, you don't. You can't. And so what people did in manufacturing religion out of nothing, according to Sigmund Freud, was they tried to take nature's greatest disasters and personify them by placing within them a deity. Right? Especially when it comes to Norse mythology or Roman Greco mythology, these kinds of things. You have different gods for different, the ocean, Poseidon, or a god of this storm over here, Thor, with lightning. And now we have a god, now the storm, just like an army or a mugger, we can cry out to someone. We're not stronger than the storm, but maybe we can satiate the personified storm, the deity within the storm. We can make some kind of sacrifice, some kind of plea bargain, so that the storm would relent and not destroy us. Now, the reason why Sigmund Freud fails in this argumentation is because it does not account for the triune God. And the reason it doesn't account for the one God who truly exists is because what we see throughout Scripture time and time again is that when people encounter some kind of judgment of the Lord, like a storm, and then realize that Yahweh is the God behind it, they don't go from being afraid to being calmed, but from being afraid to being even more afraid. See, if that was the psychology, if that was the goal, was put a God within the storm so that we don't have to be as afraid of the storm, well then what you would want to do is put a God within the storm that's not scary. But the Christian God is. The Lord is to be feared. And even Jesus says, do not fear those who can harm the body, kill, destroy the body, but after doing so can do nothing more, but rather fear God in heaven, who after destroying the body also has the power to condemn your soul to hell. He is a fearful God. He is the living God, terrible in his judgments. And this is precisely what the Phoenician sailors experienced. It's indicative, it relates to what the disciples with Jesus experienced. Jonah is sleeping on the bottom of the ship. Jesus likewise is asleep on the boat. The disciples wake him up and say, "Do you not care that we are perishing?" They are afraid. But in that gospel narrative, when Jesus speaks and stills the storm, even with the disciples, the same concept is there. It says that the disciples go from being afraid of the storm to being exceedingly afraid of the one who has authority over the wind and waves. Jesus scares them more than the storm does. So too, Yahweh scares these Phoenician sailors more than the storm does. So it's a common or classic L for Sigmund Freud. Right? That shouldn't come as a surprise.